Well, you did. Oh, see. Yes.
That looks like it's
There you go.
working.
All right, there we go.
We're good?
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Sorry for anybody who's watching. It's just a little bit of technical difficulty there, but we are live now on YouTube. So welcome to the January PEDC meeting. This is the first PEDC meeting of 2021. We can just do a quick round of introductions. I'm Seth Murtaugh. I represent the 2nd Ward and chair of the committee. We're joined by Donna Fleming from the 3rd Ward, Laura Lewis from the 5th Ward, Steve Smith from the 4th Ward, Cynthia Brock from the 1st Ward, and Joanne Cornish, our planning director. So we'll start off with any changes to the agenda. I don't believe there were any. So seeing none, the first thing on our agenda is public comment. And I do believe there are some folks that are signed up to speak. Is that right, Joanne?
Yes, there are. Yep. So I will let them in, I think in the order that they signed in.
Okay.
All right.
Just so folks know, it's the rules are you get 3 minutes to speak, and you'll get a warning when there's a minute left.
Okay, so the first person we have is Celia Bakaitis, who I'm letting in.
Hi, Celia.
You're muted, Celia.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right, so I'm Celia. I am with Sunrise Ithaca. I work in Ithaca with developmentally disabled population. We're at a point in history where we have all these interlocking crises: climate crisis, racial justice crisis, economic crisis. They demand attention now, and that need for change gives us all this incredible opportunity. We're all agents in how this story plays out. It's our moral imperative to use whatever tools we have available to us to build a society that's just and livable. And policymaking is a pretty powerful tool. And as the public, we're here tonight using our voices, which are our tools, to empower you to use your power as policymakers to act to the full extent of your ability and act to create that just and livable future. We're witness to the snowballing of the climate crisis. We're sort of at the beginning, and we're already committed to increasing damage, right? We all know that, but we do have agency in determining how far we let it go. Natural gas has no place in the green building policy. We fought so hard to ban fracking in New York. We worked our butts off, and we are doing the thing where we're being hypocritical and continuing to allow harm to occur to our neighbors just to the south in Pennsylvania and to all of us collectively, of course. So we can be on the front line of the wave with this. We can be on the front of this wave, because in a decade, requirements for fossil fuel free development will just be the norm. It doesn't mean that we should wait or that we can't afford to wait to make the requirements. Ithaca is golden for development. It's a no-brainer that new development in Ithaca must not include natural gas. We can be brave and out ahead on the front of that curve. And in fact, because of our position and leverage as a city, it is our duty to be out on the front of that curve. And in the same way, so that, I guess that's my request that's my main request, is no natural gas in this green building policy. And second, we need to recognize that this green building policy is just the very first baby step in our commitment to a Green New Deal. Ithaca committed to Green New Deal, which includes social justice measures. And because all of these crises that we're facing are so interlocked, we need to do a lot of reflection on how our social policies all contribute and compound these interlocking crises. So there must be language that contextualizes the green building policy within a greater social justice.
And that's 3 minutes.
Thanks. That's 3 minutes, Celia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and next we have, sorry. Hannah Brodsky, who I'm going to let in. There we go, jeez.
Hi, Hannah, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
So you can go ahead and give your comment.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. Yeah, my name is Hannah. I live in the 4th Ward, and I'm also going to be discussing the green building policy. So I saw in this policy that fossil fuel energy projects. Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Can hear
can
you,
hear
yeah.
you.
Great. Okay. Okay.
I think you're maybe muted now, though.
Hannah,
I'm
you're
sorry.
mute.
I'm having some
That's okay.
technical difficulties, but it's figured it out. So as I was saying, I saw in the policy that the fossil fuel energy projects can qualify for points under the custom energy improvement category. Since these buildings are going to be in use in 2030, most likely, it doesn't seem like this policy is in line with our goal of 2030 carbon neutrality. It's really urgent that we limit our carbon emissions to minimize the enormous long-term consequences of climate change. And IFCA is really in place to set a precedent for what green building policy should look like, and we can be leaders in this field. So I want to press for a prerequisite of no fossil fuels in the energy efficiency points category. Thank you for all your work and for your time this evening.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, let's see, next. We're gonna bring in Zazu Scott. Zazu, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
here.
there you are.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I had to get situated. But yeah, hi everybody, thanks for having me. My name's Zazu, I'm an organizer at Climate Justice Cornell, and I'm here representing Climate Justice Cornell today. So CJC has been engaging with the city's Green New Deal since it was passed in 2019, and we just want to make sure that the version of the green building policy that goes into effect is just and equitable. So CJC strongly supports Sunrise's policy recommendations, which I believe Rebecca submitted via email, and I think she'll be speaking on later. Now, while we support all of Sunrise's recommendations, I'm just going to speak briefly on 2 of the recommendations that we feel strongly about. So in particular, we really feel that we need to raise the minimum number of points required for development from 6, maybe to 10 or 12. New buildings need to lead the way towards our goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. And we worry that the 6-point minimum is kind of a handout to developers. We also specifically want to elevate Sunrise's recommendation that a no fossil fuel prerequisite be included for all custom energy points. So my understanding is that in the latest draft, the prerequisite has been removed. And I just don't see how this is in line with our goals of carbon neutrality by 2030, since the new fossil fuel heating or other structures will likely still be in use in 9 years. So overall, CJC is really thrilled to see movement on this policy. It's been a long time. But we just wanted to raise some specific concerns. And as we continue with the green building policy, we just want to remember that an energy code alone doesn't ensure that a building's production meets our values of climate justice. And committing to a green building policy that's really compliant with the city's Green New Deal requires additional policy to ensure strong labor standards, community input and development, affordable housing, and building accessibility. So we just kind of wanted to air that final point, just that we need to be thinking holistically about not just the sustainability implications of the Green New Deal, but also the social ones. But yeah, thank you for your time, and I appreciate your service.
Thank you. Okay.
So
And-
did you let Seth back in? He said he got booted
Seth got booted?
Yeah.
Let's see.
in the waiting room. And also, whoever said you were hearing two at once, you probably have the YouTube screen open on your machine, and that's a little delete. Turn off YouTube.
Okay, Seth is joining. Hey, Seth, not
Sorry.
sure why, not sure what.
Yeah, I'm having some internet difficulties.
Oh, okay. As long as it wasn't me, I'm got
No,
a few.
it was me. I think my computer's being a little funky.
Okay.
Um,
Next, can I let the next person in?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Chelsea Steffies. Okay.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hi.
You can go ahead and give your public comment.
All right. So my name's Chelsea. I live in the 2nd Ward. I've only been in Ithaca for a few years now, and I've really loved the celebration and commitment to the environment that individuals and groups here express. I'm so proud to live in a place that has already passed a Green New Deal and is starting to work towards carbon neutrality by 2030 and ensuring that these benefits are shared among all communities. However, I feel like the green building policy in its current state doesn't really address either of those issues sufficiently. New buildings are still allowed to use fossil fuels, which doesn't push us closer to carbon neutrality. They can get points for following the New York stretch code instead of just making that default that all new buildings should be following. I'm also saddened to see that this policy doesn't really make true on its goal of trying to reduce inequality. I think that we have to have something in there that's going to actually make sure that all communities are seeing the benefits as the Green New Deal sets out to do. I'm also just concerned, as other people have voiced, that you only need 6 points, and increasing that, I think, would be beneficial to actually meeting our goals of this policy. So yeah, I hope that the new draft that we get to see soon will reflect these ideals and show some of the stuff that we need in order to reach the goals that the Green New Deal has set out. But I thank you all for your time and everything that you do. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you. Okay, and next will be Rebecca Evans. I can find her now. Here we go.
Is Rebecca there?
Hi, thank you.
There she is.
Yes, I'm Rebecca Evans, 522 West Seneca Street. I'm actually just going to read the same email that was sent to PEDC members, and I'm going to read this on behalf of Sunrise regarding the green building policy. Sunrise Ithaca has been working diligently to fairly review the newest version of the Ithaca Energy Code supplement in a way that acknowledges both the urgency with which we must eliminate greenhouse gas emissions here in Ithaca and globally, and the need to swiftly adopt the IECS into city code. And as such, we've developed a list of recommendations that we urge the PEDC to consider. We believe that these recommendations are fair and can be reasonably adopted within the existing green building policy timeline. Our recommendations are as follows. 1, increase points required for development from 6 to 12. 2, include some narrative or framing on the climate crisis and additional equity justice framing. In previous versions, mention of the climate crisis was included, but for some reason that has since been removed. Sunrise Ithaca has also provided some potential language that could be used as a resource as well. We provided that via email. 3, eliminate points for walkability and swap those points for multiple use development instead. 4, for all of those custom energy points, include a prerequisite that there be no fossil fuels in the building like in previous versions. 5, eliminate that 6-month grace period for adoption. 6, require an independent review of all documentation and reporting. And lastly, 7, require every new building meet the standards of the New York Stretch Code. As I'm sure you've noticed, Sunrise Ithaca remains committed to the targets and principles of the Ithaca Green New Deal. And we're extremely grateful to the PEDC for your consideration.
Thanks, Rebecca.
That's all we had signed up for public comment.
Okay. I had one person who explicitly asked me to read out their statement. It's Katie Sims. And Katie writes, I'm a member of the Ithaca Hub of the Sunrise Movement, and I'm commenting in support of all the demands the organization has made. I think the outlined demands make the policy much stronger, put us on a reasonable path to carbon neutrality. It has become so feasible to electrify and move away from fossil fuels that taking baby steps is unnecessary, and considering the pace of climate change unacceptable. This is the time to take big steps to challenge developers to create buildings that actually build a city that lives up to our values. 6 points isn't a challenge, and it won't create buildings that will be carbon neutral by 2030, as this city is committed to. We need more points, speedy implementation, and to revise the point system to do away with points that don't actually confer a building being green. And I should just say that we have had a number of written comments that reflected the bullet points that Rebecca listed in her last comment. Moving the 6 points to 12 points, improving the framing and mentioning climate change, and some of the other issues that she mentioned. Most of the emails that we received kind of echoed those points. So just wanted to mention that because I realized, they didn't necessarily ask to be read out. And I think if we read all of them out, we would be here until 4 in the morning. So I just wanted to mention that we have received a number of emails today on this topic. So with that, I'll ask if there's any response from committee members to the public comment. Oh, and I'm just seeing Todd Kurzweil sent an email saying he couldn't get into the comment. I know he sent a written comment earlier.
He sent a written comment. He's not in.
He probably tried to sign up after it was closed. There's a time you have to sign
Oh,
up.
that's true. Yeah.
Well, we could mention the comment he said earlier, which if memory recalls was for any development that this board is approving, we have to improve communication with any affected property owners or business owners that could be affected by the development. That was the gist of the email that we received earlier. So with that, is there any response from committee members to what was said tonight?
I'm fine waiting till we get to that item.
Get to the topic? Okay. So with that, the next item in our agenda is announcements. Do we have any? Oh, actually, no, we have a special order of business. This is a public hearing. Right. Green Street Garage Urban Renewal Project. I don't believe there is anyone here to speak on that topic, but we were legally required to do this. So why don't we go ahead and move
Yeah.
that public hearing? Is there a motion to open the public hearing? Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Steve. All in favor of opening the public hearing? And that carries unanimously. So as I said, we didn't get any comment on that, but I saw look for a motion to close the public hearing. Moved by Laura, seconded by Cynthia. All in favor of closing the public hearing? And that carries unanimously. So next up is announcements. I don't know if we had any, we don't have any listed in the agenda, but I don't know, Joanne, would this be a good time just to like mention the whole council development 101?
Yeah, and that's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
We, several years ago, we did sort of an informational session for Common Council, kind of Economic Development 101, just to go over some of the terms and ideas and return on investment. And so we thought that probably after April 15th, tax day, we've got a lot of things on the agenda, but sometime in the spring, we'd like to do just sort of a information session on economic development and share with council, and also have you share with us questions you may have about certain things. We'd like it to just be an open dialogue, but one that may be helpful to you as you consider projects.
Thanks, Joanne. Okay, any other announcements? All right, so first action item we have is the authorization for the mayor to execute an intermunicipal agreement regarding historic preservation staff services. So this is an intermunicipal agreement between the town of Ithaca and the city of Ithaca, and I believe Brian is here to address this. There's a nice memo from Brian in there and a resolution. So why don't we go ahead and move the resolution, and then if we have any discussion, we can do that. Is there a motion on the resolution? Moved by Laura, seconded by Donna. Any discussion or questions for Brian? Laura?
Thanks, Seth, and thanks, Brian, for providing the information. I did have a question about the future membership of the Joint City and Town of Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission. Can you share some thoughts on who would comprise that commission and what the voting rights would be on, for example, city-specific projects?
Absolutely. So that is still an item that's in discussion. I've talked to Rod Howe, who is the supervisor for the town, about what an ideal composition would be. And for me, I think that's keeping it under 10 members, ideally 9, so that there's rarely a tie vote, and then having at least 3 members from the city, at least 3 members from the town, and then having 3 members that have expertise in historic preservation that could be either town, city, or other municipality residents, because it is sometimes difficult to fill those positions. There's a requirement now to have 3 individuals with training in historic preservation, architecture, landscape architecture, architectural history. There's a list of items. And sometimes it's difficult to find people that can fill those positions from within the city. And so we often look outside of the city for that expertise.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions? Cynthia.
Is this coming about from the feeling that there are large areas in need of historic preservation in the town?
So the town feels that they do have some historic resources that they would like to protect. One that is mentioned frequently is Forest Home. It's a National Registered Historic District, but without the local protection. Property owners are allowed to modify their buildings without some type of oversight to make sure that the alterations are appropriate. A lot of the discussion about creating a landmarks ordinance in the town stemmed from a Greek Revival house that was purchased by a developer And the building was slated for demolition and the lot subdivided into 3 smaller parcels for student housing projects. And there was a groundswell of people that felt that that building should be saved, and it was eventually moved, but that was really the impetus behind it. The town feels they have historic resources that are worthy of protection and would like to find a way to make that happen.
Thank you.
Donna.
Is the vision that you or whoever your successor might be would jointly serve the city and the town, much like Nick does in his role?
That is I think the vision. Right. Nick's position is pretty balanced. He splits his time 50-50. It's probably not going to be an equal split for the historic preservation position, just because the city, for the foreseeable future, will have far more locally designated historic resources than the town. But, maybe in 15 or 20 years, it would be a more equal balance. But for right now, that's kind of the vision is a split of time, but not an equal split.
But there would be one person doing both.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Steve.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing this, Brian. I guess the only question I really have is, do you feel like there's a way to accommodate this without impacting the services that the city receives, or that the amount of work you're able to do for the city?
Absolutely. I do think, my schedule is always full, but I think it's a great opportunity to collaborate with the town. And there with using the same commission, or there is a lot of overlap that would be time saving. If I'm hosting one meeting a month, it makes the preparation just slightly more than I already do. So I do think I don't think that there would be that services that I provide to the city would be diminished by this project.
Any other questions, discussion?
That's good to hear.
Donna?
I just wanted to note that Brian did ask me to formally present a very small amendment to the resolution we have in our packet. Should I read it now, or
Yeah.
were you not
Sure,
ready
we
for
can
that
read
yet?
it now, and then you can make the amendment.
Okay. So the draft MOU is currently being reviewed by the town's attorney, and there could be some minor non-substantive changes. So there should be a whereas that says, whereas this draft memorandum of agreement is currently under review by council for the town of Ithaca, now therefore be it resolved that the committee recommends to common council authorizing the mayor to execute the intermunicipal agreement regarding historic preservation staff services, including any non-substantive changes that may result from the document's review by the town of Ithaca's attorney.
Okay. And is that amendment friendly to the seconder? Okay. Okay. Are we ready to vote on this? Any other discussion? All right, ready to vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Thanks, Brian. Although you're up for the next one too. So, so next up is the certified local government subgrant authorization to apply. So this is a resolution to support a grant that would support a conference. Is that correct? I don't know if maybe you want to say a little bit about what the conference is, and then we can move it.
Absolutely. So each year, the Landmark Society of Western New York hosts a statewide historic preservation conference. It gathers, preservation professionals, elected officials, community and economic developers from all over the state for a 3-day conference. There are training sessions, information sessions on best practices for historic preservation, what's new and changing in the field. And it's a great networking opportunity. And so the Landmark Society of Western New York each year partners with a community to host the conference. And usually the host community is both the financial host as well as the physical host. Last year, the conference was supposed to be held in Syracuse and at the Syracuse Hotel. And because of the pandemic, it was held virtually. This year, the conference will be held virtually again. And the Landmark Society was looking for a partner that they could, one, that had an established preservation program that was well respected, and two, they felt the staff there would be responsive and helpful with the project. So they approached me, and I thought it was a great idea. It was a great opportunity to promote what Ithaca is doing to preserve its historic resources. And I agreed to bring it to council for review. So the grant would be used to fund the conference sessions, the keynote speaker, and scholarships for certified local government communities, some of their commission members and elected officials, city elected officials, as well as our commission members and some other residents throughout the state. It's hopefully going to fund around 100 conference attendees. Usually there's between 400 and 500 attendees to this conference. The certified local government grant is one that we're eligible for because we are a certified local government, and the funds are 100% reimbursable. So the city would have to front the money, but all of our expenses would be reimbursed. There is no local match. And with our partnership with the Landmark Society, there would be very little work on our end, apart from some, accounting work, as well as some reporting work for me.
Great, thank you. Seems straightforward enough. Is there a motion on the resolution? Moved by Laura, second by Cynthia. Any discussion on this? Sounds like a great opportunity. Donna.
Yeah, it's funny to think about planning, not hosting, a different sense of hosting for a conference. But who would manage the technology?
So there is a private technology company that handles the all aspects of the virtual conference. They used I forget the company's name last year, but they handled all of the sessions, coordinated with the speakers. I was actually a speaker last year, and I can say that the company that they used was seamless for both the speakers and the participants in the conference.
Thanks.
That's good to hear, Brian, because you don't want to rely on me.
Laura.
Thanks. And thanks once again, Brian. Happy to hear that you were a speaker last year and happy that you've brought this forward. I think it's a great way to promote the work, the very good work that staff in the city of Ithaca are doing. It's a great opportunity. I think it's terrific. So I'm all for it.
Great.
Thank you.
I did have a question. It's going to be virtual in November. I mean, was that just because of the uncertainty around what's happening with the pandemic?
Yes. Yeah. There's the planners and organizers felt, one, we're applying for funding now, and the cost of hosting a virtual conference is far less than hosting an in-person conference. So there are budgetary issues that need to be ironed out before we apply for the grant. And so one of them was whether it was going to be virtual or not. And there was no certainty that hosting a conference in person would be practical in November. So we decided to go with virtual.
All right. So it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you, Brian.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Absolutely. So next up, we have a very big item. This is the disposition and development agreement for the west and center sections of the Green Street Garage mixed-use urban renewal project. And there are a number of resolutions tonight under the category of the Green Street Garage redevelopment. This first one is the DDA. This is kind of a long resolution, but I'll just try to summarize it real quick. Obviously, we've all been working on this for a while now. Common Council identified, kind of tasked the IRA with seeking out the programmatic elements that would go into the redevelopment of the garage, which is a conference center, housing units specifically targeted to affordable, street level active uses along Green Street, retention of the Cinepolis movie theater and a public walkway between Green Street and the Commons, at least 450 parking spaces open to the public, of which at least 90 will be available for short-term parking. The Common Council kind of laid that out as the guideline. The IURA went away and negotiated this and has come up with this DDA and voted, conditionally approved a revised DDA in November, subject to Common Council approval, for a redevelopment of project that includes the following: at least 181 housing units, affordable to households earning between 40 to 80% of area median income, approximately 356 new and refurbished public parking spaces located in the center section of the garage, a 49,000 square foot conference center with street level active use, 2,000 square feet of DPW lease space for the City of Ithaca Department of Public Works, retention of the Cinepolis movie theater, and retention and improvement of the public pedestrian connection between East Green Street and the Commons. So this is the step. We pass it at the committee level. It will go on to Common Council for the full approval. So we've got this resolution here. Maybe the best way to handle this is to go ahead and move the resolution, and then we can open it up to discussion. Is there somebody who's willing to move the resolution? I see Laura's hand up. Is there a second? I see Steve. So any discussion? I know we're probably going to have a lot of questions about this, and Nels is here, as well as Tom, as well as representatives from the project team. And I know everybody has been working on this for a very long time, so there's a lot of very complicated details in this negotiation. So with that, I'll open it up to the floor and ask if there are any committee members that have questions. I'm not seeing anybody raising their hands. Laura?
Thank you. Thanks, Seth. Nels, I wonder if you could comment on the reason we're seeing this revision on the DDA in the document, in the resolution. There's a statement, whereas in response to concerns expressed by the city and an adjacent property owner, the project was revised to increase separation distances between neighboring residential towers, resulting in a decrease of 36 housing units, which subsequently received site plan approval. I'm glad there has been this negotiated agreement and this change. But it's my understanding that those 36 housing units, or some such number of affordable housing units that have been removed from the Vicino project, will possibly be incorporated in another development in the future. So we're not necessarily losing all of that affordable component. Is that true?
That's correct, Laura. The negotiation with the adjacent owners of the Herald Square building that provided the expanded space between the two buildings did have a second component to it. Bruce Adibiazdi from Vicino is here with us if we want to get in, take a look at that separation distance physically or follow up on more details about this. But generally speaking, they have secured an option agreement to acquire an area of land. It's sufficient in size for about 100 units at the Chainwork site when that becomes available for development. So it's both of them are very excited to work towards a second project at the Chainwork site that would be focused on affordable housing, maybe as many as 100 units.
It's a good summary.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I had a question I saw Donna. I'll do mine real quick and then we'll jump to Donna. About the affordable housing, I saw that the housing is 181 units between 40 to 80% of AMI. Do we know what the breakdown is of the 40% versus 50%?
Yes, we do. It should be in the term sheet. If you go to the term sheet section of the attachment to the DDA, and I'm trying to run through it and pull it up right now as we're looking at it. And if you go to the housing component, you can look at the middle of the page. We have 8% is at 40% or less of area median income. 24% of the units are at 50% area median income. 47% at 60% area median income, and the remaining 13% at 80% area median income. So there's a broad spectrum of income levels here designed in the project, all at the affordable ranges.
Thanks. Donna, did you have a question? So I think you're muted, Donna.
No, I don't have a question, but I believe that I've been clear and honest from the very beginning that I don't support the conference center. And I have not found reasons to change my mind. And so with all due respect to people who've been working on this and who do have reasons for supporting it, I can't support agreements that continue to plan for the conference center, which I've always thought is a bad idea, and now I think is a worse idea than ever. So I'm sorry, but I won't vote for this.
And I think Nels, in your memo, you said that the parking, the conference center, and the affordable housing are sort of intricately connected, right? So it's not like if we pull one of them out, it's kind of like the whole thing's going to fall apart at this point.
That's correct. What we've learned from the state of New York's Housing Finance Agency is that this is an expensive project from their perspective. It's a high-rise urban project and in a large number of units. And the term sheet that they use to score projects and to approve them for this project requires subsidy levels above their normal term sheet amounts. And by building in community development components such as a conference center, it makes it more a better project from the state's perspective, one that has additional advantages and allows them to make the argument that it's justified to have higher subsidy per unit to make this project work. So if we were to pull out the conference center right now, one, it'd have to go back through site plan approval process, and that would take months, in all likelihood. And secondly, it would very likely face an uphill battle to get the state funding for the affordable housing, because there's not an easy way to reduce the per unit cost of the housing on the project.
Why does one of the documents have a clause about in the event that the conference center is abandoned, then this space will be used for 9,000 feet of commercial space and more apartments? Why is that clause still in there then?
Well, it is a fallback plan, and we would give it a try if we had to make that work, but it loses that argument that it's a community development project at that point. There would be an increased number of housing units back to the, above the original number, which does help spread the costs among more units. So there is, some mediating, impacts on, it would reduce the per unit subsidy to some degree, but it would ask for a larger amount of money overall. And we would make our best effort to try to make that argument. But as we've gone down the road for 2 years discussing the project with the state and its representatives, it's become clear that there needs to be the best case for getting the financing is to integrate a community development component in the project.
Cynthia, and then George.
Like Donna, when this came to council for a vote, I believe was in February or March, I voted against it then. I will be voting against it now. My biggest concern, obviously, is the financial guarantee that the city is providing for the 30-year debt for both, well, mainly for the conference center. The part of our economy that the conference center supports is our hospitality industry, which is notoriously a low-paying industry for the majority of its employees. As we've all seen, it is an industry that is very vulnerable to economic ups and downs as we are. And it doesn't build the types of economy and jobs that I think we need in our community to add stability and diversity for our residents. I think right now the pro forma is putting out a 6-year recovery period during which they expect that our level of tourism will meet that in 2019. I still think that that's fairly optimistic. During that 6-year recovery period, we will be having to rely on tourism income or our hotel income to pay this guarantee. And if that doesn't result there, it puts additional stress on our community. If we were to look at this again and make this decision now, I agree with Donna. I would have preferred to have these resources go into something that would benefit the community at large. For example, a downtown bus depot. So I also have very specific questions about the agreements themselves, the financing that's been put forward. I really want to thank staff for doing their best to answer these questions in a very short period of time. And anyway, I know we have several versions of this that will be coming to us for discussion tonight, but that provides some background as to my vote.
All right, George up next.
Thanks, Seth. I just have a quick question that won't surprise Nels. I'm concerned about access to the businesses on the south side of the commons, in the rear of those businesses, and the fact that there used to be a loading dock as part of the plan, which I understand is no longer there because of the size of the conference center. I'm also worried about access to City Hall, parking for City Hall. So could one of the developers speak to how they're ensuring that businesses on the south side of the Commons and Herald Square, for example, will have loading access after this project's completed?
I think, Bruce, would you have some images that you could help share in this? But the general issue here is that there is currently a shared right-of-way that goes through the parking lot of City Hall that serves several of those buildings from Home Dairy Alley westward. And that easement is going to be retained after completion of the street in its current legal framework and boundaries. What has happened over historical time periods with the city ownership of the garage is the city has been generous to let people utilize areas that the city owns under the garage for various loading and unloading uses. That will continue with this project to the extent feasible, but the building's is a large building and there's not a lot of room. But at the end of the day, that easement after construction's completion will be fully intact with the and consistent with the current agreements. And I think Bruce may have some imagery that he could perhaps share. If we can share screen.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So as Nels pointed out, once we're done with the construction project, we've developed a conceptual plan of how that area west between us and City Hall would look. I think you guys can see my screen here. It's a little diagram of the proposed future parking and unloading area. And so City Hall entrance remains as is. And there's some new bicycle parking here. There's some nice egg work that needs to happen in this area. So it's going to be all torn up at some point in time through this course of this project, but we'll put it all back together. As you point out, George, the loading area for the conference center is recessed, and underneath the second floor of the building is over here on the upper right-hand corner of this sketch. So a truck can back in and unload for the conference center, not be blocking the in and out access for the business owners and buildings to the south side of the commons. Our plan is to provide some new parking, and most of this would be 15-minute or 30-minute loading zones. There will be one city designated parking space for city vehicles, and then a couple of 15-minute parking spaces, then a 30-minute handicap parking space, then a couple of more 15-minute. These are, get in, unload your car, go to the business, or go do what you need to do at the city hall and come back out. Then there's a striped area over here on the right-hand side that would allow for a truck to come in and unload it over a period of time and come out without hindering access back and forth. So that's sort of the high-level plan of that.
Does that mean that Casino would own this parking area?
No, this area would still be owned by the city.
So the city can decide how those parking spaces are.
Correct. And we've been working directly with some of the city staff and constituents to develop this plan. This is not completely set in stone, but it's something we feel, and we've reviewed this with the business and property owners to the north, and everybody seems agreeable that this is a good approach.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is there any, oh, thanks. Any other questions, comments? Cynthia, then Laura.
I would like to know more about CRM Rental Management, who is the company that I just found out will be managing the housing component. I understand that this is the same company that was presented 2 years ago. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, when I researched it, then this was a company whose primary expertise was, if I recall correctly, mainly senior and housing for seniors and disabled, usually in complexes of about 40 units. Is that correct?
I know that their inventory of 5,000 units that they manage includes several low-income housing tax credit projects. And some of the ones that they categorize as disabled are also publicly assisted housing projects as well. They may have started out with senior, and they have a focus on, they certainly have an expertise in senior housing, but they are currently managing several of Vecino's affordable housing projects, including the one in Utica, as well as down in Elmira. So there's a strong history of working with them, and the state has also recognized them as very able and capable housing managers. The agency, the Urban Renewal Agency, was a little concerned about this issue because we want to make sure we have professional and responsive management. So we've imposed a couple of additional safeguards in the project in this regard. One is the manager is required to conduct a resident survey somewhere between the first year and the second year, and share that with the IRA and meet with the IRA. And at the IRA's option, we can require the developer to make some management changes and require some responses to those survey responses. Secondly, we've also imposed a minimum investment in property management so that there's sufficient staffing, on-site staffing at the project. So there'll be 4.5 full-time equivalent employees dedicated to the project, 2 for kind of physical operations and 2 for leasing and management. I guess that leaves us with a half one. I don't know. I can't designate for, but I think we've got some safeguards built in to ensure that we're going to have responsive, community-oriented management on the site, and their experience is broad and very much based out of a central New York headquarters in Rome, New York. So they know upstate New York.
Nels, if I could add to that too, I mean, I appreciate your concern about that. And I also believe that, as you mentioned, the state and our tax credit investors are all pretty highly scrutinizing those partnerships as we move forward. And so if there is a problem, it'll come up in that process as well.
Okay, thank you. One of our largest housing facilities of 235 units in West Hill has always experienced some management issues that we've struggled to address. So I'm clearly concerned when we're dealing with a complex of this size and complexity and density We are not, unlike, Lindeman Creek and others where the housing units are spread out. This is all in one central space around one corridor and elevator shaft distribution system. There's concerns with that. So making sure that the management company has expertise and experience in complexes of this size is important. So if the IRA has a close hand in making sure that that the needs are being met, then I appreciate that that impact or that element. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Laura, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I had a comment. We've talked about this project for quite some time. And as with many projects, many efforts, there's been some pause and delays resulting from the pandemic. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. I will say that as liaison to IURA, I know how in-depth the discussions have been, and the IURA members have asked many of the questions. For example, Cynthia, the questions that you were just asking. So the management group CRM, for example, that has been discussed and looked at in the IURA. I will say that I acknowledge there is some risk in this project, especially the inclusion of the conference center. I have supported this in the past. I'm continuing to support this project because of the benefits to the community in terms of the affordable housing, the benefits to Cinemapolis, for example, and a large benefit to the parking garage, which is desperately needed. Reconstruction of the parking garage. We've talked in the past too about the fact that the conference center would not be opening until 2024. There will be measures in place to ensure financial reserves leading up to 2024. And there is some partnership of community members, community organizations and investors in this, in the belief that this will benefit our community. It will provide diversity of housing in our center city. It will provide jobs. And so for those reasons, the partnership, the financial planning that has gone into this, I'm supportive of this. And in saying that, I don't at all intend to ignore that there are some risks, but I think sometimes it's important to take measured and calculated risks going forward for the better long-term benefit. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. I see Duxon has his hand up.
Can I ask about the potential for adaptive reuse if the worst should happen, let's say in 20 years, the conference center fails and we want to use it for housing or retail space? Is there anything in the configuration of that space that would prevent a good adaptive reuse?
Well, that's something we've been thinking about. It is a purpose-built structure. A conference center is going to be very free of columns in the ballrooms area, which adds some cost to construction, but maybe provides some flexibility for adaptive reuse at some point. But there are tall floor to ceilings on both levels, so it's probably not easily adaptable to every use without some modification. Maybe I don't know. Bruce has thought a little bit about this. He knows more about the construction, or maybe Nick Robertson, who's on this, may have some thoughts about that kind of adaptive reuse potential in the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, in a worst case scenario, the conference center fails and you want to do something else with it. My mind is, as a developer and as an architect in some ways, I suppose, is because that is my background, and by license, anything is possible for that space. I mean, you could go in and put some new columns in the ballroom and the pre-function spaces or the meeting rooms on the first floor, and you know, by building codes, it would, if you tried to add a level in there, we can do that in the ballroom area because we already have. It would basically be filling in where the mezzanine or the third floor wraps around. You could add some columns, you could add some floor structure in there. It would be very expensive. But in that case, physically, it's possible. Whether you want to spend that kind of money to do that would be a whole nother exercise and discussion, though.
And Doug, I think the first floor could potentially be converted to a retail use if there was demand for retail use. And certainly there could be an office function use on the upper floors with some modifications. It would make a lovely city hall, for example. But it, you know, it's designed to accommodate a large, you know, assembly space. And that's, you know, if we found another use that took advantage of that aspect, it could be adaptively reused. Like, you know, for example, you know, an event center, you know, it would be very adaptable for something like that. But it is you know, a specific designed building, which will be very structurally sound for 75 to 100 years. So we'll certainly have a building that'll be standing that we can, you know, can be utilized. But it will take an additional investment at that point in time if there ever was a need for adaptive reuse.
Sure, but it sounds like
Nice.
higher ceilings and fewer columns is generally more flexible to me, to a layperson. So thank you.
I saw George's hand up and then I have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Bruce, my question is Vecino willing to honor a local labor agreement in the construction of this project?
George, would it be the same standard that we talked about with the Rimland project, 30%
Yes.
construction
Yes,
participation?
that's what I was thinking.
I'll say a little bit about that, and then I'll turn it over to Nick to talk about the tactical stuff and the reality of situation. But I mean, we're always willing to honor setting that 30% as a goal. To require a mandate, you know, I think it's going to be tough to understand with all the projects that are going on right now, are starting to go on, and with the labor pool that we have, whether we would be able to or not, I don't know. But I suppose at some point it could potentially increase the cost of the project if we get a bid and it's not local labor and then we have to go to the next one. But we really won't know that. And for some of the tactics on that and some of the kind of current situations, I want to turn it over to Nick Robertson from Welliver Construction. He can talk a little bit to that point.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So, you know, we, Bruce, myself, our teams, we're committed to trying to use as much local labor as possible. You know, we, Welliver McGuire, we're a local contractor ourselves. Most of our employees are local. But one of the things that's challenging, and I'm running the North Campus project up at Cornell right now, and one of the challenges about local labor, unlike some of the other labor requirements or, you know, minority woman-owned business participation, is you really don't know at the time of procurement whether you're actually going to satisfy those requirements, because you could hire a Matco Electric, which has is an office based in Ithaca, or a Fry and Campbell plumbing and heating contractor that would be considered local. But like most local union contractors, they rely on the local halls to provide labor for them. And in certain times, particularly like this past summer, you know, you can call the halls and the halls will be empty. And over the last couple of years, we have seen the local labor utilized pretty heavily, and we've had to draw labor from, you know, Monroe County, Onondaga County, Broome County, and you start to see having to stretch out further, and you don't know what environment you're going to exist in when you procure those contracts. So, you know, we, as in, you know, this project team, we've already sat down with the Building Trades Council. We've talked to Todd Brewer and all the union representatives. We've talked to them about the project. We've asked them to talk to their local contractors. We've asked them to cooperate with us in the bidding process to try to make sure that we get as much participation as possible. so that we do have an outcome that everybody's happy about, and we don't have people coming in from outside of our local community and having our local workforce sitting home. So, one of the things when Bruce came to me and talked to me about it, it's, yeah, we want to pursue it, but it's really hard for me to give him a commitment that we're going to know when we sign contracts whether or not we can actually, at the end of the day, have those hour counts and meet that percentage.
Thanks, Nick. George, did you have further comment?
If the reason a project couldn't reach 30%, which is pretty modest, is because all the local halls were already employed, that's a problem that's acceptable, in my opinion. I'd like to speak with the local electricians and plumbers and laborers, et cetera, to see if they're thinking along the same lines, and if in fact they're all real busy, because not too long ago they weren't, even though there were big projects going on. So, but that's good to hear that you are looking at local labor first.
Thanks, George.
It'd be good to hear from the labor unions as well.
Just looking at, there's a question from Duxon about the bans for affordable housing, that the percentages add up to 92%. He was wondering where the additional 8% is. Did you see that, Nels?
I just noticed that. I'm going to go to a resource and see if I can iron out that question. And I'll try to get back to that question in a second.
All right. I did have a question about the conference center, and like Laura, I'm definitely I'm supportive of this project. I think it's visionary. I mean, I think this is an incredible project. I mean, what it achieves, you think about the parking garage alone would be a major achievement for the city. And then you also have affordable housing, which is incredible. And to have affordable housing located downtown, close to amenities and transportation, jobs is great. And the conference center, which I understand is probably the part of this project that people are the most worried about. When I sit down and I look at all of the thought and the planning that's gone into this, I'm incredibly impressed. I mean, I think that especially the work that you've done, Tom, working with everybody to really come up with these reserve funds and really try to calculate this out and build in layers of protection for the city, I think is reassuring. I think there is a question, and there might not be a great answer for this. I think this is presuming that there's going to be like a return to some kind of pre-pandemic normality in people's behavior. And I did have a question about just, have we looked into like the industry with conferences? Is there an assumption that we are going to return to in-person conferences? I mean, my sort of person on the street perspective is yes, just because I think Zoom conferences they might be cheap, but I think they're not very pleasurable for people. But I wanted to just ask if there had been more of like a kind of deep dive into that future, and if there was any if you're concerned about it, if you have a concern that there might be more virtual conferences in the future, and whether that could impact this project.
Thanks for that question, Steph. I can take a first stab, and Peggy Coleman is also here from the CVB and is knowledgeable on this subject. And so I also have a presentation, and I see Cynthia wants to ask about financing on the conference center that includes a couple slides on this topic that we can jump into at any point if that's helpful. But to answer your question, yeah, we've looked into it, and I mean from a couple of perspectives, actually. One, the future of the meetings business and what that means for our facility, but also the future of tourism more generally as it relates to room tax projections, because the conference center is funded primarily by room tax. So I think, as Laura said, the conference center opens in mid-2024. So you can imagine the question then being, what is the likely state of the meetings business at the point when the conference center opens in 2024? We took a look at a study called The State of the Meeting Industry. It was a national survey of event planners by Noland. And one of the results of that was that 45% of meeting planners believe the number of meetings and attendees will return to pre-COVID strength in 2023. 38% think that it will return to pre-COVID strength a year earlier in 2022, and 16% that it will take until 2024. You know, in a lot of ways, yeah, meeting facilities are hurting right now, as is the entire hospitality industry. But you know, being able to open, you know, at the time when projections indicate that the meetings business is going to return is a strength for our facility. Another thing I think that's important to keep in mind is we have a strong community safety record, community culture around, you know, the pandemic and safety around the pandemic. And, you know, we're building a facility in a community that, you know, does a good job of addressing those concerns. And the facility itself will be able to be built, you know, with MERV 13 filters, and we're not going to have to retrofit this to be pandemic ready. We're going to be able to build it with the appropriate HVAC system, appropriate AV, because a lot of meetings and conferences are going hybrid now. We expect that will continue. And so we'll be able to build in the AV facilities to be able to accommodate those hybrid meetings of the future. And the other thing that the meeting planners said in that survey that I mentioned is that smaller meetings are likely to dominate in the future, probably a 20 to 40% reduction in attendees, which may translate to greater demand for booking into facilities of our size. And I know I've said this before, but I think it's important to reiterate in the context of this conversation that, you know, what we're proposing to build is a pretty small conference center by industry standards. We're in a tertiary drive market. We're closer in size to many, you know, hotel conference centers like the Albany Marriott as an example, rather than first tier large city convention centers like McCormick Place or Javits Center. And those kinds of facilities are going to have different challenges. We're not trying to attract the, you know, $2,000 national, 2,000 member national conference. We're not competing with those kinds of facilities. We're a regional business kind of facility, and you know, Ithaca continues to be attractive as a destination, and so that puts us in a very different place. The other thing that we're hearing from the industry and those research items is that there's a lot of pent-up demand for travel and face-to-face interaction. Networking is better accomplished face-to-face. Learning is better accomplished face-to-face. We've certainly seen that as a result of the pandemic, and some of that business will take place in this center. So, I mean, that's kind of a high level of some of the things that, you know, we've seen as we've looked into different research. Peggy, did you want to add to that?
Well, I think the other thing, Tom, that's important to make everyone aware of, that this study, this was done in December, the second half of December of 2020. So this is not a survey of meeting planners from earlier in the year or at the beginning of the pandemic. This was literally less than a month ago when these meeting planners were surveyed. And one of the other things they were asked was, what is the number one concern preventing your clients from booking? And it related to the community's safety and the visibility of the safety. And the fact that we look at what we have done here, not just in the city of Ithaca, but in the whole county of Tompkins County, we are the shining star when it comes to the way that we have cared for each other. And as Tom mentioned, those hybrid meetings and being a third tier city, people are not going to be driving to New York City. They're not going to be flying into LA. They are looking to come to these smaller, more remote, and while I hate referring to our destination as remote, in a meeting planner's mind, that's a positive, because there is the perception and feeling that their guests will be safer by meeting in smaller, more remote locations.
Thanks. I did have some questions about the financing, but maybe, I know Cynthia does too. Maybe we can hold those to when we get to the occupancy tax. I did just have a very quick question. I saw Laura had her hand up. We've talked in the past about the local community being able to use the space, you know, and the fees being affordable for local groups, you know, whether it's a group that just wants to meet or, you know, whether it's like, you know, weddings or that kind of community function. Is that something that you're still anticipating the space could be used for?
Yeah, I don't know, Gary or Peggy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. We're in the process of finalizing a contract with our operator, and we can talk a little bit more about that. They're an organization called ASM. They are one of, I guess they are the largest operator of conference centers east in the United States, if not further. But they in the documents that we're working back and forth with them on right now, that provision is in there that we would have differential pricing for community rates. It's from the very beginning. The sense was that yes, this is obviously something that's going to be helpful for conferences and for bringing people into our community, for adding wealth, but it also is going to be an asset for the community. We as a community need a place to meet and to do things, and we struggle to do that a lot. And this is one opportunity to do that. And so we are very much committed to make sure that there's a differential pricing so that we're able to get those kind of community events in this center on a regular basis.
Thanks. That's good to hear.
Seth and Gary, this might be a good time for me to mention, because it relates to the ASM contract, another question that's come up, and that's around the living wage. So in those same documents that Gary referenced, all projected salaries will meet the living wage requirement as defined by the most recent biennial Topping County Living Wage Survey. So we put that right in the RFP. We had a preference for that, and they took that to heart, and they built all of their operating budget projections off of that assumption.
Great. Oh, I asked your question. Gotcha. Samantha, did I see your hand? No, did I imagine that? Sorry. Okay, so we have like 3 different resolutions we're voting on, so maybe we should move forward with this one, unless there's any other discussions. Oh, it's Nels. I thought it was Nels maybe raised your hand. I thought it was Samantha.
Yeah, I just wanted to correct the math question that Tuxon raised. I did have the percentages that we're using were based on the percentage of units in this project compared to the original unit count of 217. So here's the correct number. There'll be 28 units below 40% AMI, 43 units below 50% AMI, 85 units below 60% AMI, and 24 units at 80% or less. That works out to 16% in that first category, 24% in the second category, 47% in that 60% AMI category, and 13% in the 80% category. That actually adds up to 100 this time. So. And we'll correct.
Thanks so much.
We'll correct that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nels. Appreciate it. So are we ready to move forward with a vote on this resolution? Unless there's any further discussion. Okay, so
just quickly, so when will the presentation be made? Is that going to be?
I think the idea was Tom was going to make it when we get to the next item. Is that right?
Whenever you like. I think that's what we were planning on, but if it's helpful to have it before then, whenever you want.
Well, and if anybody's interested, in the overall project, just with any current images and renderings, glad to throw those up. I have them ready if necessary.
Great. All right, so are we ready to vote on the DDA? So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And I see 3, all opposed. And that carries 3-2. So next is the local law on the occupancy tax. So I'll read out the beginning of this. Whereas on February 5th, 2020, Common Council adopted a resolution stating the city's commitment to pursue a City of Ithaca hotel occupancy tax and commitment to provide a shared financial guarantee with Tompkins County. Whereas on June 3rd, 2020, Common Council adopted a resolution requesting that the New York Senate and Assembly enact the home rule legislation submitted by Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton and Senator Tom O'Mara to enable the city to implement a hotel occupancy tax. Whereas the City of Ithaca hotel tax legislation passed the Assembly and Senate in July 2020, and in December 2020, Governor Cuomo signed it into law as part of the state tax code. Now be it enacted by the Common Council of the City of Ithaca as follows, and I'll just move it as written. Is there a second? Seconded by Laura. Discussion on this. I mean, maybe this is a good time, Tom, if you want to do your presentation.
Okay.
Would that be, would this be the best time for
great
that?
for me. It works. Yeah. I'm going to do a truncated version of it,
Okay.
just to get us, moving forward, given where we are in the discussion. So let me, I mean, we've been working over the past several months on a variety of fronts. So just to kind of reference the checklist here of all the different areas of work. Obviously the room tax state enabling law, a big deal that we got that passed at the legislature and the governor signed it, and tremendous amount of advocacy and thank yous are due to the industry and Peggy and her partners at the state level and to Svante. The governor didn't sign all the room tax bills, but he signed ours. That's a big deal and it was a big effort. LDC formation. The LDC is formerly known as the Downtown Ithaca Local Development Corporation. It has been formed. The founding board members are me, Gary Ferguson, and Jennifer Tavares. At our next board meeting, we will be expanding the board membership. I think the membership is 12 members. Dan Cogan will also be a member, county reps, hotel reps, and community reps. And that'll be the group that will receive the room tax and manage the contract, have the lease with Vecino for the facility and manage the contract with the third-party operator. So lots of progress there in setting that up. Project design and construction budget. Bruce has offered to share some of that. Obviously a ton of work done there, including with site plan approval, getting through that. Vecino engaged some help, and so did the LDC, and some of that is ongoing. We worked with the group called Cine Little to do the kitchen design, a consulting firm that focuses on that. Worked with David Greisel on the overall conference center program, and now are working actually on a pro bono basis, pre-contract with ASM Global on reviewing all of the details of the project to make sure that we optimize the performance of the conference center from the perspective of the group that would be the operator. Working on the state grant contract. I think we have, if we don't already have the incentive agreement in place, it's very close. And partner agreements, all of the financial support that was part of your March resolution, we have worked to codify that in actual contracts and agreements, and that work has been done. I want to talk a little bit about the third-party contractor now, and Nels is going to cover the project financing structure in the next item, and that's been a lot of work done on that. So the LDC put out an RFP for operators and received 3 pretty good responses. 2 were particularly good, and the group ended up selecting ASM Global as the preferred contractor. They have a proven track record in upstate New York, operating the On Center and the Albany Capitol Center. And part of the reason that they were preferred contractor is there's a sense that they'll be able to leverage those networks and relationships and resources in the state to be able to bring business to Ithaca. They really have an excellent management, operations, and marketing credentials. Their references were excellent. They've opened other venues. Obviously, it's a new venue, so there's a whole set of things to think about when opening a new venue, and they're expert at that. We also have a proposal from them that incorporates a base fee, but also a performance incentive fee, and that's something we wanted to see. And we'll be negotiating the specifics of it. It can be both qualitative and quantitative, but basically, it's our way of making sure that they are meeting and exceeding our expectations as the operator. I mentioned the living wage piece, and they're helping now with a lot of pre-opening elements on a pro bono basis. We're in negotiations with them about other activities that they might undertake in the pre-opening period in support of opening strong. So that's where we are with our contractor. I want to talk about the room tax revenue projection and how we develop that. And as I alluded to earlier, we've been concerned about the tourism industry. It was a really, really bad year in 2020. Peggy can tell me if this is accurate, but perhaps the worst ever. As measured by the county room tax collections, it was down 58% in 2020 over the 2019 peak. We are projecting that 2021 will be a little better, but still not great. We're projecting it'll be down 35%. Anecdotally, I had a conversation with one of our major downtown properties last week, asking for corroboration of this assumption, and they are budgeting for 30% down over 2021 for their property. So we're a little more pessimistic than them, but I mean, I think in a lot of ways we tried to be very pessimistic and conservative in the way we've approached this in order to make sure that the center is as successful as possible. The 2022 to 2024 projections are based on national projections, and then we took a couple points off of national projections for those years. The national projections from Smith Travel Research and Tourism Economics have the industry returning to 2019 levels in 2024. However, we're projecting that we'll get back to there in 2025. And why is that? I mean, basically, there's a strong consensus that occupancy is going to return more quickly, but it'll take some time for the rate to recover back to the 2019 levels. The room taxes, the memo described, will be used in a variety of ways for a variety of purposes during the pre-opening period. The proposal is to start collection on April 1 and collect for 3 years before it opens. That would allow us to accrue $4.37 million in room tax prior to opening, and that would go to supporting the construction budget, pre-opening soft costs, and capitalization of reserves. A little more on the assumptions behind that projection, and then I want to actually walk through the pro forma briefly. We are assuming a fairly hefty rate of exemptions, given that we are, a college town and we have that type of charitable and government business here. We're assuming 25% tax exempt stays. That's from historic data. There's two pieces here that are, I think, really important to mention. It's that our model, we base it on actual revenues, actual rate, supply, exemptions, and occupancy from 2019. And then, as I said in the earlier slide, backing it down from there. What we don't include is also important. We do not assume any induced demand from the conference center. And if you take the Hunden study and apply the number of net new rooms to an assumed rate, and then take a 5% of that, we're looking at stabilization likely an additional $150,000 in additional annual revenues that's not accounted for in our projection. That's out of a desire to be conservative in our approach. The other, I think, really important thing to mention here is that we are not assuming any room tax collection related to Airbnb stays. The reason that that's important is that we're actually a pretty big Airbnb market. I've done a lot of work on this, and the market, the total revenues in Airbnb properties in the city likely ranges between $5 and $11 million. You take 5% of that, and $200,000 additional annual revenue is a conservative estimate of the amount above what we projected would come from Airbnb. To be successful in collecting that, I strongly believe it'll be really important to have a voluntary collection agreement in place with Airbnb. I did that with the county when I was there. Airbnb was very willing to do it, and it makes it a whole lot easier for us as a city to collect the tax rather than going to a whole bunch of different hosts. We just go to one company that collects the tax on behalf of all of their hosts and remits it directly to the city. So it's a service to the hosts too. They don't have to worry about submitting quarterly payments to the city. So we're going to pursue that, and again, it's not assumed as part of our revenues under this model. So that makes me feel more confident. So let me just very briefly walk through the operating budget. I've got this broken up into 3 pages, and this was in your agenda packet here. This page, these numbers are from ASM. They're pretty close with some differences to the numbers that we had from Hunden, except now they've actually developed a real budget. They operate conference centers similar in size to our conference center. So they're actually they're basing their projected budget off of budgets and actuals from other facilities. And they gave it to us for 3 years. And so the net operating income after the incentive at the bottom line beyond year 3 is just an assumed rate. We assume it goes up because we assume that the business goes up, and therefore, just as a marginal piece, the net operating income the loss would go up as well. So one thing I didn't include in this area of the pro forma is the hotel payments. However, one could assume that they are part of the operating budget. So you can assume that that net operating income after incentive at the bottom line there is probably about $50,000, less than that. There is a significant loss in year 1, and then stabilizing at around what they're saying 128, or actually in their proposal 78. That's 128 minus 50 in year 3. Out of an abundance of sort of conservatism, this assumes that grows, that loss grows in out years. Let me turn to the next page. This is the actual room tax budget, if you will. It's the LDC will take the room tax and pay the lease payments, cover any operating losses, work with the operator. And so this is the really important sort of budget from the city's perspective, I think, to pay attention to. And basically the net operating line is just carried from above. That's the anticipated net operating loss. We have a City of Ithaca room tax collection, and that is with all of the assumptions built in that I just shared with you. Year 2 here is kind of like 2025. It's actually a 12-month period that probably begins in mid 2024 for year one or mid 2025 for year two, but that's a 12-month period. And so you see 1.9 million, that's the base assumption from 2019 when we return to that assumption. And then that grows 2% a year from there, which is less than we have seen historically in an average annual growth rate pre-COVID in our local tourism industry. That rate has been more in the neighborhood of 5 to 6% average annual growth, but we do assume some growth there, 2%. There's an amount from the retail rentals. There's an amount for DPW rent. And here's where the downtown hotel sponsorship shows up. That is a commitment that they are making as part of the agreements that we've developed for 10 years. And that's a collective sponsorship. I guess the amount works out to $12,500 for each of the 4 downtown hotels there. It gets you to your total revenue. On the expense side, the annual debt service, basically, it's a $34 million project. We're putting $1.25 million in pre-opening room tax revenues directly to construction. The hotels are putting in $100,000, and we have a $5 million state grant. So we're borrowing $27 million and change, and that debt service is the amount given the interest rate that would be required over a 30-year period annually to support the bond financing. The Vecino additional rent, that's basically their carrying costs. They have committed to not charge us anything that is in profit here. It's basically just their costs for legal and accounting. The accounting audit, that's for the LDC. Sales and marketing is an additional amount beyond what the operator, ASM Global, will provide, just to help us make sure that we're getting eyeballs on our conference center as a place to do business. And then this capital reserve contribution piece, we're going to start, and I'll show the reserves in a second, with a $500,000 reserve from pre-opening revenues, but then we want to grow that over time. So starting in year 3, we start to have a contribution to a capital reserve of $25,000, and then that grows to $250,000 annual in years 7, 8, 9, 10. You want to make sure that you've got a sizable amount of funding in place to do a refresh of the facility to keep it attractive for business. So that's what we've done there. And then there are some administrative expenses borne by the LDC, including their insurances and a part-time staff member to help manage the finances. That gets you your total expense line. The difference here, one line is showing the difference, basically the net profit or loss with the capital reserve contributions and without. I think it's important to show without, because you would have some flexibility in any year about how much to put into the capital reserve, basically based on how well you ended the year. But as anticipated, we see a pretty sizable loss in year 1, a small loss in year 2, and then we start to see net positive bottom line that can replenish that primary operating reserve and then start to go into the capital reserve. I'll wrap up here in just 2 minutes. This is what happens with the reserves over time, given the assumptions in the pro forma that I just shared above. As we previously shared, we're starting with some reserve balances. Some of those are from pre-opening room tax revenues. I'll list the ones that are from pre-opening room tax revenues: the primary operating reserve, the rental reserve, the capital reserve, and the city final reserve. There are also some partner reserves. The DIA, starting in 2024, will contribute $50,000 annual to a reserve, and the hotels will start with a $150,000 reserve that in any given year, if it's used or needs to be used, will be replenished back up to $150,000. What you're seeing here is that it's not needed, so it just stays there in case it ever is needed. And basically, you know, I showed above the net loss in year one of -445. That does reduce your primary operating reserve balance down. You deplete that in year two, dip into the rental reserve balance, but then in year four, you start to rebuild your primary operating reserve. It's back up above $500,000 and then grows from there. We're utilizing a little of the rental reserve balance. The capital reserve starts to grow up to 1.4 million in year 10. The DIA reserve balance is not utilized and grows to 500,000. Hotel reserve is not utilized. And finally, the city final reserve balance grows because we have county payments coming in to support the city in our role as providing the financial assistance agreement for the financing, starting at 111,000 and growing to 137,000 in year 10, which allows our city final reserve balance to grow to 2.37 million. Somebody asked in the recent meetings, you know, looking at these numbers, so what happens, you know, if you hit all these numbers or, you know, cross your fingers, do better than this with these pretty sizable reserves that you may or may not need to continue growing. And I think, you know, the city would have some options at that point if we find ourselves in that situation of, you know, making sure we have a robust capital reserve, putting more and more toward marketing potentially, or even going so far as to reduce the room tax rate. So those are all nice problems to think about having. You know, I think just to leave you with a final comment, the combined amount of $50,000 plus $150,000 that we are not tapping into under this, you know, base scenario here, the projected scenario. If you did worse than your projected scenario in either the room tax collections or in the operating loss, you know, you could afford to be worse by $200,000 a year, basically ongoing, before you start to tap into the city final reserve. So that does provide a little bit of assurance to us as a city. We will be setting up a financial oversight committee that will be comprised primarily of city staff that'll develop the annual room tax budget and review the finances of the conference center. We're embedding some powers, you know, for that group into the agreements with the partners and into the LDC documents that, you know, basically allow the city to force certain remedies if we start seeing things go in a bad direction. You know, we do have some buffers here, which gives us some time in the case that we start to see things go in a bad direction. So hopefully that gives you, you know, a good sense of the how the finances are working. I think you're speaking, Seth, but you're muted.
I was just asking if you could stop the screen sharing just so I could see everyone. Thanks. Any questions? I see Cynthia and then Donna, and then I had a question.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. First off, I understand, is it correct that by state law, the room tax can only be used for the conference center? It cannot be used for, say, the parking associated with the conference center or other elements associated with city operations?
That's correct. The way that we wrote the the use clause in the state enabling legislation, and understand this is, you know, a partnership, you know, with the lodging industries, and their support has been critical to achieving that legislation. And that was important to them. We did build in, on the one hand, a up to 4% withholding for administration. So we can withhold up to 4% to support the tax collection and enforcement. And the use clause is also written in such a way that if there are services that are supportive of the conference center, you know, it's expansive enough that, you know, other things besides, you know, necessarily just the debt service or the operations of the conference center could potentially be supported, but we probably would not want to stretch that too far. You know, it's things like if transportation begins to become an issue around the conference center and you need to shuttle people from a remote site to the conference center, you know, one could see an argument where that would be, you know, directly supporting the operations of the conference center, and therefore it would be allowable under the law.
Okay, thank you. The second question,
Ari's logged on and he was about to say something.
Hopefully no, I've been here the whole time, actually. Yeah, I just wanted to say to your question, Cynthia, there is a bit of wiggle room that we built into the legislation there. It certainly can't go and be used on random other city purposes, but it was a reasonably broad association with the conference center in terms of the definition of scope for those expenditures. So we could work through particular questions if there are particular subjects that council's interested in spending it on that are associated with the conference center.
Okay, so theoretically, to Duxton's earlier point, if it was determined that we wanted to change the facility into something besides a conference center, we would not be able to use those funds to do so.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you. The second question I had has to do with the new financing proposal that we're looking at. I think it's called a lease back revenue bond fund, something like that. And if I understand correctly, I've been trying to wrap my head around the 33-year term. So our obligation for the guarantee is for the body of the 30 years, not the preceding 3 years, where it's an interest-only payment. Is that correct? Are we obligated for the first 3 years of the interest-only payments for both the parking and the conference center?
Go ahead, Nils.
Yeah, actually, technical way, yes. The financial support from the city is required throughout the entire life of the bonds. However, there's no payment due for the first 2 years of the parking garage or for the first 3 years of the conference center because the interest-only payments are capitalized into the initial funding. It's a lot like a construction loan in a construction project where there's interest that is due on that loan, but it's also covered in the initial loan amount. So we're taking on a little additional debt to cover the interest payments that are due the first 2 years for the parking garage and the first 3 years of the conference center. So that money is prepaid and available already. So there's no new obligation for the city at that point in time because the money's already in place for that. Then there'll be a 30-year period, which coincides with the lease terms on which the city will be committing to support those projects to the extent that there's any deficiency in the pro forma, as Tom just showed. Should there be a shortfall, then the city is obligated to make those bondholders whole.
Okay, I get it. So those first 3 years of interest-only payments get built into the principal starting year one, and then added on that way.
That's exactly right.
All right, it just clicked right into place. I get it now. Thank you.
Do you have other questions, Cynthia?
I did, but now I've completely forgotten. Oh, quickly, why is it called a voluntary collection agreement and not just an obligation agreement by Airbnb to collect taxes on behalf of their vendors? Because that word voluntary just gives me pause. So does that mean something? Why is it called a voluntary agreement if it's not voluntary?
I think strictly speaking, the host would be the one who would be required to collect and remit the tax to the city as the owner of the lodging property, essentially. Airbnb is just it's just a booking platform, they will tell you. But so it's voluntary because, they can put that on their hosts if they want to. They have been willing to enter into these types of agreements with communities because they want to be seen as good community partners, and it really doesn't impact their business. It's really just an administrative mechanism that allows us to more efficiently collect.
And so that therefore, obviously in the hotel tax legislation, it describes the recourse that the city can take if it finds a vendor that is not actually collecting the hotel tax and then goes after them. And I'm just assuming, but just for point of clarification, Airbnb is starting to be replaced by other big players in this arena like VRBO and so on. I'm presuming that the city, county, so on, will be pursuing agreements with those other venues who manage or use as facilitators for B&B type lodging?
It's a good question, and definitely something to keep our eye on. Right now, Airbnb is still the dominant player. So that's kind of the low-hanging fruit for sure. And for a long time, VRBO also has a kind of a built-in tax collection and commission system. They use Avalara. But you're right, there's Expedia getting into it. There are other players. And so I think it's something that we track with data. As we've talked about at council in the past, there's also some interest on the part of the industry in having the city look at other types of rules, related to zoning, et cetera. The county is looking at contracting with a third-party vendor to support basically tracking the information and also support them with compliance with their county room tax. There's an opportunity for us to partner with them in that. If we needed to pursue individual properties, we would have some more tools, basically, if the county does move forward with that contract with that vendor. So yeah, I think we'll definitely be keeping our eye on it and trying to respond and come up with solutions to make sure we maximize compliance with the new room tax law.
Thank you. No more questions.
And just to close the loop a little more clearly on your question of a moment ago, Cynthia, I just pulled up the actual statutory language from the state bill that authorized the room tax. And what we got authorized there was that the funding could be spent on construction, promotion, maintenance, capital improvements, and operations of the conference center and other directly related and supporting activities, including all financial costs and obligations incurred by the city related to the creation of the conference center. So again, that include construction, promotion, which is an interesting one, maintenance, capital improvements, and operations, plus related and supporting activities.
Thank you.
It doesn't include building something there different there instead.
It doesn't allow us to use some of that funding to pay for parking, for example.
If it were a supporting activity, I think it may be, if the conference center needed parking.
All right.
Interesting question.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
So I think Donna had a comment or a question.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for Tom. So I'm looking at our agenda packet, which is page 39 for us. So you mentioned the 4%, the county will contribute 4% of county room tax, which you estimate will be somewhere between 76,000 and 111,000. so on and so forth. You mentioned that, and then you mentioned the DIA, $50,000 per year. Now, why don't we see those two funding sources on the next page? We're
Yeah.
under revenue, because you show the room tax, and then you show the downtown hotel sponsorship at 50 grand a year. I don't understand why the DIA contribution and the county room tax are not there. So that's one question.
Yeah, that's a good question. DIA one is the easiest to answer. They start their payments in 2024, so there aren't any payments from the DIA before that.
But then wouldn't that start showing up in year 4?
2024 is year 1. This is an operating pro forma essentially. So there's actually a 3-year period when we're collecting room tax.
Yeah.
And actually we're also collecting payments from the county.
Yeah.
That don't show up here, because this assumes a mid-2024 opening. And so the total that I estimate will be collected in county room tax
Yeah.
in 2021, 2022, and 2023 will be around $280,000.
Okay.
And that amount would be available to the city to use in support of the conference center in whatever way made the most sense for the project. My sense is that the best use of those funds will be to support some of the pre-opening soft costs. But for example, if we needed a portion of those funds to go somewhere else, and we had the flexibility in the soft cost budget, we could put them there. So they're kind of fungible, flexible funds for us.
But I still don't understand why they're not in the pro forma.
Yeah, no, good question. The reason is that the pro forma begins in 2024, and all that 3-year period starts now and goes from now until mid 2024. So I think it's referenced separately in the memo, what happens with both pre-opening hotel room occupancy tax revenues and county payments. But it's not in the pro forma, because the pro forma really starts on the day that the conference center opens.
Okay, I'm sorry to belabor this, but you refer to the county tax growing to more than $100,000 annually by the year 30. Anyway, okay.
The county payments start showing up in the pro forma beginning in 2024.
Okay.
So there's a 3-year period of county payments that are not included in the pro forma.
Okay, so where are they I'm looking at page 40 of the agenda, and you've got the pro forma operating and revenue at the top, and you have cash flow at the bottom. And
sorry, Tom, can I jump in and maybe help with just one piece of this? So the pro forma for the actual capital project is a separate document, and that is where you'd be able to see more clearly, Donna, like the extra money from the hotels that's coming in towards the capital construction cost is reflected in that document. It's not in this packet. This is not the construction pro forma. This is the operating pro forma, and they're just 2 different places. So the room tax that's going in the front end towards capital, which is where maybe Tom would be also reflecting the county's contribution on the front end, might be going into that bucket of money. That's on the capital project document, the actual construction pro forma, not the operating pro forma. So that's why you're not seeing some of those extra contributions on this document.
So,
that makes sense to you and maybe everyone else.
So an annual contribution every year for 30 years is in the construction? Oh, wait, never mind. I'm going down a rabbit hole here. So looking at the pro forma on page 40, I find it just very disconcerting that if I'm reading this right, the room tax somewhere between 1.8 million, 1.9 million grown to 2.2 million is the largest source of revenue. It's not like the room tax is just pushing us over the edge. It's not a subsidy. It's the largest source of revenue. Is that right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, this project relies upon room tax.
But that just doesn't seem healthy to me. But I know I'm in the minority, and that's all my questions.
I mean, I think it, so Samante, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say that it's not unusual for conference activities to be paid for by the people who are coming to visit the conferences. It's sort of how it's fed, right? The people will come to the conferences, stay in the hotels, they'll pay the tax pays for the conference space. It's how it would work if the conference center were built into one of the hotels. But in this case, the downtown hotels are going to split the business more or less equally, so the tax helps it work in that fashion.
Thanks. Do you have any other questions, Donna? Or
No,
comment?
thank you.
I had a question about, which is kind of related to this, actually, the Airbnb. Because you mentioned, Tom, I think when you were in your presentation that, the 2% assumption growth of the room tax is conservative. Because you were looking at pre-pandemic, I think you said it was like 5 to 6% growth. Does that number include Airbnb, or is that just hotels?
So if I understand your question correctly, I was speaking about the historic rate of growth of revenues in the lodging industry.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer your question, yes, that historic rate of growth in the lodging industry would include Airbnb. It would include the growth in supply over time of hotels in our market. And Peggy, you were about to say something, and I know you're close to this as well.
It reflects a growth of total room tax collections. So all entities collecting from guests and paying in: hotels, traditional professional innkeepers, and Airbnb.
So I think that's an important point, just because, I think, and I know you say you plan to pursue Airbnb. I think it's really important that it's included, that the tax include that, because I think that would be a more accurate reflection of those numbers that you're referring. And it sounds like there's a plan to do this. I wasn't really sure what you meant by pursue. Is this something that we know? Does the enabling legislation allow us to expand the room tax to Airbnb? Is that something is there a plan? What is the plan to do that? Because I think that would make me feel more sure about just give us a cushion at least. You said, I think it was like $200,000.
It's a good question, Seth. The way that the room tax law is written, it's quite clear that short-term rentals, including Airbnbs, are subject to the tax.
Mm-hmm.
If you pass this legislation, they will be required by law to register and pay the tax. We know from experience and history that it is very challenging to collect the tax from, well, Peggy just posted the number of folks in the county, hundreds and hundreds of individual property owners who may or may not see themselves as being a lodging operator in the community as subject to business requirements or this tax. The law is quite clear that they are subject to it, but you have a compliance and collection and enforcement problem on your hands. The way to solve that problem is to go directly to Airbnb and say, hey, would you please, have an agreement with your hosts in our city, as they do countywide now with the county room tax, to collect our tax on behalf of your host and remit it directly to the city, and be the middleman to help us. And when we did that with the county, and I negotiated the first agreement in New York State 5 years ago, we increased compliance with the room tax by Airbnb hosts from maybe 25 to 30% to 100% overnight. So do I have confidence that Airbnb is willing to enter into a voluntary collection agreement with the city? Yes, I do, because they've done it with the county, and the county's actually been in a very recent conversation with them about this, because the county last week voted to increase their tax on smaller lodging properties of 10 rooms and under from 3 to 5%. So they need to go back to Airbnb to modify their agreement with Airbnb. So I've been in touch with Jonathan Wood, the county attorney, about that. And he said, yeah, I'm in touch with general counsel. They have no issue with it. So I assume we would also have no issue. Does that answer your question, Seth?
Yeah. And I guess the concern is just that, if the 2%, as your assumptions right now and calculations right now, it sounds like the 2% only applies to the hotels. I would just want to make sure that, there actually has been historically 2% growth in the hotel industry. And that you're not sort of relying on this broader number of like the Airbnb and the small inns and the rest for calculating that number. I think that was the concern that I had.
The majority of the room tax collection still comes from the hotels in the county.
Okay.
And Seth, that 2% growth, that's basically just a CPI assumption,
Right.
Consumer price index, inflation over time. Some years it'll be more, some years it'll be less.
Any other questions? All right, so this has been moved and seconded, I believe. And are we ready to vote? I see Cynthia. Do you have a question?
So while I have stated that I'm not actually in support of the conference center, and I will vote that way, knowing that I'm in the minority and the conference center is underway, I want the city to be successful. I want to secure our financial future, and that's why I'm going to support this vote.
Thanks. All right. If there isn't any further discussion, all those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries 4-1. And then we have the final resolution, which is the city participation to finance the public portions of the Green Street Garage mixed-use urban renewal project. So I'll just try to summarize this as best I can. It's another long resolution. So Vecino has proposed separate financing for each of the 3 major components of the mixed-use project: the affordable housing, the parking garage, renovation and construction, and the conference center. So the financing for the affordable housing, the Vecino will finance the affordable housing component without city involvement. The financing for the parking garage and conference center is proposed to derive from taxable revenue bonds issued by the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency to fund development costs. Whereas the bond financing is structured to provide a fixed interest rate with level annual principal and interest payments for 30 years to retire the bond following an interest-only period during construction. Whereas the proposed financing structure requires Vecino to pay principal and interest on the taxable revenue bonds, and whereas Vecino in turn seeks rental payments from leases of the completed conference center and parking garage to meet bond obligations. And whereas neither the conference center nor the parking garage is projected to generate earned revenue sufficient to retire the bonds, the revenue bonds are only marketable with participation by the city of Ithaca. And then it lists the major parties and roles involved in the contemplated funding, which is the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency, the Asteri Conference Center LLC, which would be the owner of the conference center, Asteri Garage LLC, which is the owner of the parking garage, Downtown Ithaca Local Development Corporation, which is the not-for-profit entity leasing the conference center, and the city of Ithaca. And the following, and then it lists the city participation that's required to secure proposed financing for the conference center and the parking garage, which is a city lease from Vecino of an approximately 350 space parking facility with a 30-year term with option to acquire a facility at end of the lease term. City lease from the LDC of an approximately 2,000 square foot DPW maintenance space with a 30-year term. City Vecino Parking Garage Financial Assistance Agreement, which is a city commitment subject to annual appropriation to pay the bond payments. A City LDC Conference Center Financial Assisting Agreement, which is a city commitment subject to annual appropriation to pay the other bond payments for the other series. And amendments to 2000 agreements to release M&T's Bank's leasehold mortgage and assignment of rents held on the Green Street Garage premises. And so the resolves just kind of list basically what I've just said, those terms. So I'll move the rest as written. And seconded by Steve. Discussion. I don't know, Nels, did you actually have like a presentation on this, or is it more just sort of a Q&A?
I'm thinking more of a Q&A. I did have that memo in the packet that tried to explain the efforts. And I think, you know, the framework you want to, we kept in mind looking at this was we're trying to find a way to build public components of the project. So we can't expect the developer to finance this and take this on unless we can mitigate the risk associated with it. They are willing to be the technical ower of the bonds, but they can only do that if they have lease agreements in which the beneficiaries of those public components agree to make payments to them sufficient to repay the bonds. And so we looked at a couple of different approaches to financing this, you know, bank financing or general obligation debt like the city does on a lot of other public components. And really, this seemed to be the most advantageous means of financing it because it locks in our historically low interest rates during at the issuance of the bonds. It will stay steady for the 32 or 33-year term. We've got low interest rates now, and we want to try to lock those in at a fixed rate. You can't get that with bank financing, and actually general obligation debt financing for the city usually doesn't go 30 years either. So we're trying to keep an affordable rent payment for the conference center and the parking garage, knowing that these facilities are going to last at least 30 years. At the lowest cost possible. And that requires the city to take a role to support the two projects with the conference center, as Tom's explained, is primarily through the hotel tax collections, which will be supporting that. For the parking garage, it'll be through parking revenues from the project will be the chief source of resources available to the extent that that covers it. We do expect that there will be a gap between the revenues from the parking garage and the actual cost because above ground parking is very expensive. And we have, as a community, really supported the concept of shared parking in a downtown area that doesn't interrupt the urban fabric and tries to maximize, the minimum number of parking spaces downtown to support everybody's needs in a shared parking facility operated by the city. You could argue that the parking rates are also a subsidy to the users because they do not cover the true costs. So this is really an effort to try to find the best way to finance this project. And the debt service on the bonds is in Tom's pro forma as that rent payment, which was 1.55 million projected for the conference center. And we're projecting about $840,000 a year for the parking garage.
Thanks, Nels. Questions, comments? Donna.
Yeah, so Nels, I'm looking at your memo, which is on page 62 of our packet. And I'm wondering if you could give me the kindergarten version of steps 1 through 7. So step 1, TCIDA issues taxable lease revenue bonds with proceeds flowing to Vecino. Does that mean TCIDA borrows money from somewhere?
No, it doesn't mean that really. What it means is that the IDA is going to be the issuer of the bonds, but they're not the buyers of the bonds. They're going to make those available on the market for bond purchasers to buy those bonds based on the structure that's designed here. So really, they're a conduit. They're not taking a risk position. They're facilitating the issuance of bonds. They have the power to issue bonds, and we've asked them to support this, and they've agreed that they would play that role as an issuer of the bonds. But they really don't have any financial obligation to repay those bonds. They push that on to Vecino in this case, which then passes them on to the tenants.
So Vecino borrows money from somewhere.
Yeah, essentially Vecino is the one obligated to repay the bonds.
Okay.
But they're going to get that money from the lease of the conference center space to the conference center local development corporation and to the city for the parking garage.
Got it. Okay, now step 2, Vecino leases conference center, but then step 3 is TCIDA leases back conference center.
This is where it gets kind of overly complicated. And the reason for that is the IDA has to have a way to assign the tax exempt, the pilot agreements and the tax abatements. And the
Yeah.
way the IDA does that is they take leasehold interest of the property. The IDA is a tax exempt entity, so they can then negotiate a payment in lieu program with the developer or the property owner at that point. And this is the method they use. They take a leasehold interest in the property and they lease it right back to the developer. So that's the lease and the lease back. I'm just, yeah, and so then Vecino would do what was technically a sub lease to the parking garage, for the parking garage in the conference center.
That's step 4.
Yep.
Okay. And step 6. All right. Thank you. I think I have another question. I have to formulate it though. Thank you.
Any other questions? I had a question just about the parking revenues. It's just reading through this. It seems like the assumption is that the revenues from the hotel tax will cover the lease for the conference center. But it sounds like you're anticipating a shortfall with the parking garage revenues coming in. Is the assumption that there will be more parking, or will down the line there'll be a need to raise rates to cover that? Is that something that we're assuming, or?
I wanted to just try to be as honest as possible about where it looks like right now, that if we didn't make any changes in the parking rates and the occupancy rate was 75%, which it was pre-COVID, where we would be with this, we would not generate enough revenues to repay the debt on the bonds for the new construction. We expect with 381 new housing units built on this super block, along with a conference center, that there's going to be a lot of induced demand for parking and that there should be a higher occupancy rate. And as we increase the occupancy rates, it's often very appropriate to look at the occupancy rates will increase, and then there could be a potential increase in the parking rates as the increased demand, builds up. But if we keep the rates as they are currently, you could have a full occupancy of the parking garage and you would still not raise enough money to repay the full debt.
So we're kind of setting ourselves up to increase the rates in the future to cover the debt, right? That seems like what we're saying.
Yeah, to the extent we have capacity at the Cougar garage as well. So if we can push some of the demand over to Cougar garage, that would also help offset the overall city subsidy for parking, because we can continue to fill that up as well and create some more revenue there. So I think it makes sense to take a look at it in the larger downtown public parking sphere, but I don't want to sugarcoat it. Public parking in upstate New York, small cities, is very difficult to cover the full costs of construction and operation of those facilities.
Thanks. Any other questions? Cynthia.
Earlier today, I had a list of questions, which both Nels and Tom very diligently and thoroughly answered. Thank you to both of you. You may not have seen at the very bottom of that email, I had offered a slight edit to that final resolved, just to say that in that first bullet point, execution of a city Tompkins County agreement to provide 4% of county room tax collections to support the conference center. I just wanted to include that in case you didn't see it.
I would consider that a very friendly amendment and a clarification.
Thanks. Donna.
And so Nels, you commented earlier about the city, the contributions from the city making a public commitment, the city's taking some risk. Isn't the fact that the city is selling this property for just $1 some an indication of public commitment? Am I misunderstanding something?
No, I think it does show there's very strong commitment by the city to support this project. I think the affordable housing component is maybe the driver for the public benefit initially, because we didn't know if the conference center was going to be feasible at that point in time. And that is part of the consideration the state has taken in looking at their subsidy support for the affordable housing component, is that the city made a sizable contribution to making this project feasible by offering the center and west sections at $1.
But that's not sufficient.
Not sufficient to repay bond costs for it really doesn't help cover the bond repayments in any direct way, because Vecino's not seeking to make a profit on the garage or the conference center. They're looking to break even on those components.
Mhm. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments before we vote on this? Are you ready to vote? Are you shaking your head, Donna?
Yeah, I'm not ready to vote.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead and vote, or do you want us to? Did you have a question?
That can be answered.
Or a comment?
My conscience is my question.
That's very profound. I see Cynthia had her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I share Donna's hesitation. I mean, this is a very difficult time. I understand people's desire to get back to normal, people's desire to see some normalcy. You know, in December, we had not heard about the British variant. Now there's a variant that's coming out of Brazil. You know, so we are far from the end of this, and this is a huge commitment on behalf of the city, an obligation, and this is hard. It's hard. So I appreciate Donna's hesitation.
Yeah, I think it's a huge decision. And there, as we've said throughout the evening, I think there is some risk to it. You know, I think though, if you look at, we have to rebuild our parking garage. I mean, that's, you know, if we weren't doing this project, we would be pouring however many millions of dollars into rebuilding the garage. We need affordable housing in our community, and we desperately need affordable housing in the core of the city. And we've talked for years, and the Chamber of Commerce has been, and the DIA and groups that are really invested in the conference industry have been pushing for years to expand conference space downtown, because there's a demand for it, and we've seen that. And I agree that the pandemic is frightening. You know, I think we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like, even once we clear COVID. But I think there is an assumption that we will, at some point, even if it's a different world we're inhabiting, get back to meeting each other in person again. And I think, you know, there is a huge demand for that right now, as has been said. I think that even though I don't think we'll ever get back to the normality that we experienced pre-COVID, I'm hopeful, and I know that you know, the community continues to be hopeful, and certainly the county, which has done unbelievable work responding to this pandemic locally, continues to be hopeful that we will persevere and we will move past this terrible time, and we'll emerge stronger because of it. So I choose to be hopeful, even though I understand, and I'm certainly conscious of the risk involved with this project.
Yeah, you know, I think if this were a project with the parking, with the housing, more housing, and then included something like, again, like a bus depot, I don't think any of us would be voting against it. But the pandemic this is something new. This is something unusual. Until the world has access to vaccines, until the variant doesn't, you know, now this new variant is saying that people who've gotten it are getting sick again. So, you know, it's disturbing. And I think that of all times to be putting constraints on what the city can be spending money on, now is not the time. And the city obligation for the next 30 years is what gives me great pause.
Any other comments? Acts of conscience. All right, ready to vote? All those in favor? And all those opposed? And that carries 3-2. I really want to thank especially Nels and Tom on the city side, and obviously Jennifer and Peggy and everybody else who have worked so hard. I mean, this has been unbelievable. This is a very, very challenging project. It's really complicated. It's got a lot of intricate moving parts. But I think the project really reflects the values of this community. You know, being creative about the rebuild of a big parking garage downtown and figuring out how to work in our affordable housing goals and also our goals, you know, to expand, you know, conference activity in our community. I think this is incredibly laudable effort. And I just really wanted to thank all of you for the incredible work that you've done to get us to this point.
I agree.
Local law to the clerk's office tonight or tomorrow to get laid on the table for a February council vote.
Perfect. Great, thank you. And yeah, so
On
these,
the
table? I know, which is no table that we get to see, but yeah.
It's an electronic table.
Yeah, okay.
we'll see you in February at the council meeting. Awesome. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Here, here. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So the last item is the green building policy.
Yes, and I'm just gonna let Ian Shapiro and Nick Goldsmith in.
I see Nick.
There's Nick.
Are we waiting on Ian?
Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there's Ian. Okay.
Okay. So hello to Nick and Ian. So just to clarify, I mean, this is another big thing we've been working on for many years. And just to clarify, tonight we're getting sort of a first review of this, and we'll be voting to circulate it for more public comment. I know we've gotten a lot of public comment already. A lot of people who emailed us today and last month. And we'll circulate this for comment, and then it'll come back. And I believe we'll hold a public hearing next month. Is that correct? I might not have the timeline completely right, but at least next month or the following month, hold a public hearing. It's just to get that wider community input.
It'll probably be next month.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. That would just to get, you know, everyone's input, both in writing and for the public comment.
Yeah. So I guess at this point, you know, I could open it up. I don't know, Nick or Ian, if you have any sort of preliminary words you want to say about this, or we could just sort of open it up for Q&A.
I just wanted to sort of lay a little bit of the groundwork for this, and I know there's been quite a bit of you know, quite a lot of emails and some criticism about the length of time it has taken to do this. I do want to remind everyone that you know, we did start this several years ago, but in that time frame was also the pandemic, which slowed us up, and also the you know, the launching of the Green New Deal, which we spent a considerable amount of time on with Nick to kind of launch that and support the mayor in that effort. And so, but now we're getting to a point where we're really closing in on it. And so I'm going to let Nick and Ian take over. But I did just want to put that out there for people who are watching this. I think it's important to say that we're very excited to have gotten to this point, but we've had several obstacles along the way. Nick, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, why don't I just give you, if it's okay, a quick update of where the documents are at this point. Also wanted to acknowledge one of the great things that happened today is that the U.S. is back in the Paris Climate Agreement. So on the right track again. Yay. So the ordinance, there was one substantive change, which I'm happy to show you. It's one line. There was an error, but a kind of big error where we incorrectly stated the grace period was nothing, when in fact we're proposing a 90-day grace period between adoption and effective date. That's in line with state code. We've got consensus on that from the town and the city, heads of planning and codes and buildings. Agree that 90 days would be inappropriate. So that's what's in the ordinance now. Mm-hmm. And then for the energy code supplement, several changes, but I would say non-substantive. So I marked in that review copy that was in the agenda packet which sections are still being worked on. So those are now more advanced. We're nearly done with the performance path, whole building path, and the future sections. Renewable energy, as indicated in the document, still needs to be updated. So I'm shooting for a end of week, maybe a little work needed over the weekend to finish up the energy code supplement draft. Great. So are there any questions? I know that we have received a lot of email on the, specifically from Sunrise, and they had laid out a sort of set of bulleted concerns. I don't know, Nick, if you had a chance to look at those. And I was listening to comments also. But yes, I was forwarded a couple of those comments. I understand they're all fairly similar.
Identical.
Yeah, they're almost all. Yeah, I think it's the comments that we got sort of really echoed one another.
Yeah.
The concern about increasing the points from 6 to 12. There was the concern about the framing, that I guess there had been some language about climate change that had been in a previous draft that I guess is not in this one. And then there was a number of other concerns that they had listed. I could probably find the email. Yeah, so I will say that from the last draft, that was August 2019, we got a couple hundred comments. There's a few new slants to the comments, but most of these we've addressed in some way or other. So they've been reviewed and have made changes to the document accordingly from those previous comments. I'm happy to address the ones that came in today specifically, but I don't know if you want, maybe just ask if you're interested in specific ones. I'm happy to address them with Ian's help. I mean, the one that we heard a lot of is that the 6 points is insufficient, and that we should increase it to 12. If that was a concern. Okay, Ian, I'm going to take a stab at this and then kick it to you. So yeah, it's fair enough. So a lot of the comments from before also were on the same line of why not advance the timeline instead of waiting for 2025 or 2030? Why not move up those timelines to make it more stringent? Why not ban natural gas sooner? Why not require net zero sooner? We've gotten several comments in that line. I will say regarding the 12 points immediately, I'm a little hesitant to do that, partly because I'd like to see how it works sort of as planned first, even if it's for a shorter period. And part of that reason is that the 12 points is also based on the fact that the grid is getting cleaner. So we sort of built that into the calculations, the grid getting cleaner over time. So if we did it immediately, it wouldn't exactly reflect our intent. Ian, can I call on you to maybe add more detail and say this more clearly?
I think you captured it well, Nick.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously I don't know this nearly as well as the two of you do, but it kind of seems to me that most of the projects that are going up now, and correct me if I'm wrong, would meet this code. Is that correct? That are being built. I will say that a lot of projects have been using it as a yardstick. They have been saying either we aim to pass
the energy code supplement, or here's how we stack up. We'll get 4 points, but they are already using it as a tool. Joanne, do you have any more to say about the likelihood of existing, current projects passing?
I think most of them are, we do tell them to look at our energy code supplement, although it's not been adopted, that they should be striving towards that. And I think that most of the projects, not all, and of course there are always some issues with it, but most of the developers are looking at it and are trying to hit those marks for the success of their project, because ultimately it's going to be less expensive and more environmentally friendly for them. So, yeah.
And I should mention one more point actually too, which is that there's a healthy IDA incentive available if you do the Ian, it's the 2025 requirements currently, which gets you the IDA standard. Is that incentive? Is that correct?
I would add, and I don't know this for sure, but I think most of the multifamily development would meet the current IECS, and anything going through the IDA is meeting 2025. I'm not sure that's the case for commercial building, and there's kind of reasons for it. Which is that the residential heat pumps have come down in cost. So we've got people using them just purely for cost reasons, not for environmental reasons. That's not the case quite yet with commercial heat pumps.
No, that's true. We see the heat pumps used much more in residential projects.
So I guess, I realize it's a little hard to respond to Sunrise and the points that came in, because, they came in today. I don't know if the committee's interested, or Nick, if you'd want to maybe take some time and look at these changes they're proposing and see if this is something, some of them we could adopt or make changes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but we do want to collect the comments, including those that came in today, and then if we circulate it, the comments that come in over the next couple of weeks, and they will be addressed, and they'll be looked at, and we'll formulate answers to those that then you will be able to review. And should some of those concerns that were raised today or in previous comments make sense to change, then those, that recommendation will be brought back to the planning committee and ultimately the common council. So does that make sense, Nick? Because that's what we talked about today, right?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can comment on just a couple of them that we already have thought out fairly well from the previous round of comments. So the last one, I'm going off of the list that Rebecca Evans mentioned. She listed 7 bullet points. So her last one, making New York stretch code mandatory. We did discuss that. From day one of developing this energy code, one of the things we really wanted to focus on, besides reducing emissions, was keeping construction affordable. That was stated as a really strong value for the city and the town. And that gets to the point of, I think that's the closer we get to the sort of the social justice argument that the folks from Sunrise are making too. So affordability is a big emphasis, and we didn't want to include making the stretch code mandatory because we don't see it as affordable for the amount of greenhouse gas reduction you get. We wanted to make it an option, but it's not in the affordability section there. We think it's a good option. We wanted to support that state effort, but didn't believe that making it the baseline for all buildings was the way to go.
Are there municipalities that are doing that? Are making the New York stretch code like the baseline for their?
There are. The town of Bedford, who we are partnering with on a different project, are considering that either this past week or the next week, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I think New York City may be adopting it or has adopted it. And the concern is that it's going to affect like affordable housing. Is that that it's going to just drive up the cost of like building affordable housing?
I think that compared to some of the other elements in the code as written, it's more expensive per unit of carbon reduced, if that makes sense. And also I want to note that, I mean, it is part of the code. Our code seeks a 40% immediate reduction in emissions. The stretch code is something in the, Ian, is it 5 to 15% range, somewhere in there?
Yeah, it's funny because they kind of average it out, but it's higher for residential and multifamily, and it's harder and lower, delivers very small savings for commercial buildings.
And so that's why we offer 2 points for the residential meeting the stretch code, 1 point for commercial, and make it a part of ours, but only an element. I mean, that's our bar is higher than just the stretch code.
And we really, really have pushed affordability. So we're trying to offer with the easy path, affordable, and then for people who want to build luxury or unusual or gas-fired, then there's the whole building path, but that's a more expensive path.
And actually, maybe I'll also mention one of the other concerns that came up from some of the commenters, which was they were referring to the point OP5, other points 5, which is this custom energy improvement. This is the one, it's through the easy path, but let's say you use some technology or some method of reducing energy use, which is not on the list. You're free to do that as long as you can prove the energy reduction. In a previous version, there was a prerequisite for that point, which was that no fossil fuels be used in the building. So it had to be an all electric building already. Due to comments we got in the last round, we decided to remove that exemption. In other words, even if you have a gas heated building, but you made it more efficient, you could earn that point. And why? I guess because partly we are already allowing gas projects as written, although I know there's a lot of discussion to be had there too. If we're allowing gas, well, we felt because some people commented that way, we had to, we could give in that area. So in some ways, the newest version is a little more stringent than the old version. In some ways, it's a little less stringent, like in different parts of it. And this is one of the ways that give a little more flexibility if your project, if you didn't want to or couldn't make it all electric.
So on the subject of gas, and anyone else who wants to jump in here, I don't want to monopolize this. I did have a question just about the gas, because you mentioned that it sounds like a lot of residential housing are moving over to heat pumps because the cost has come down and it's now more affordable than it used to be. Commercial is still using gas. I mean, is it possible that we could just say we're going to make it part of this code that we eliminate natural gas in residential new construction?
Yes, so I do want to make the point that we have analyzed the code, and a ban on natural gas, whether it happens now or in the future, is totally would mesh fine with the code as written. It doesn't annul any work we've done. The effect would essentially be people would be starting off with more points. Most likely to be using heat pumps, so they'd get the points for the heat pumps. But it doesn't require any changes to the code if we were to, as a part of the code or as a separate initiative, if we were to ban fossil fuels in new construction. To answer your question, yes, that would be one option. I think it is easier, Seth, in residential. That could be one. Can I?
Commercial natural gas, is that like, is it for like all commercial, like, is there any particular industry which is using more of it or less of it?
I'm going to kick this one to Ian, but I first want to say that even after 2030, when we've banned natural gas, and even today for there's a few points that require no natural gas in the building, even then we allow gas for cooking and for process energy. Process energy being things like industry, being things outside of space heating, water heating, what am I forgetting, Ian? And
something like labs also.
Yeah, so labs would fall under process energy use. Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Donna.
Yeah, could you comment on, I didn't understand on the rationale that some of the, well, it's not some of the people, since everybody used the same language, whoever originally wrote that email, I didn't understand. Could you comment on what the possible rationale is for them to want to eliminate the walkability criterion? Or substitute something else for it?
I can speculate. I don't know if that's
That's
helpful.
fine. I like speculation.
Okay, I'm
The
happy to
lighter the
speculate.
better.
I mean, the good news is you can never get speculation wrong, right? Like, I think some people see that as a freebie. So I did see some comments that came in that there was a little more detail around this person's comments, and I'll note that they gave a little more, I guess, individual thought to add flesh to the Sunrise recommendations.
Mhm.
But this person was saying that because most projects in the city of Ithaca, or I don't think it's totally accurate, but I agree that many projects in the city of Ithaca would get it anyway, this walkability point. They see it as not being as impactful. I'm guessing that it's around that area, that there's less impacting the building by making a specific change to it, and it might be a freebie, which we also realized when we wrote it into it, and when we still are encouraging building in areas we want to develop more. But
okay.
This is Doug. Can I say a little something about that? Just expand on what Nick just said. It's like, so this was intended for both city and town use. And so I think there is value. You take that into consideration. There's value in incentivizing building in the city, in a denser area, or the parts of the town that are denser. So we did debate this quite a bit, but I think ultimately it made sense to, there's still parts of the city that are denser than others, and it still makes sense, I think, to maximize walkability in the newest development.
Yeah, good point.
Other discussion? And realizing that we're just circulating this tonight, so we're going to try to absorb the commentary we got today and come back next month and maybe have a little bit more clarity about some of the direction here. So unless there's further questions on this, I guess we can just move to circulate. Does that sound right? Is there a motion to circulate? Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Donna. All in favor of sending this out for circulation? And that carries unanimously. So I guess we'll be back next month and we'll continue this conversation. Yeah. And thank you both for joining us tonight and answering our questions. And may I ask a clarifying question? Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate the willingness to circulate. I think it's will be welcomed by the community. Given that it's very close to much more done phase, is it okay with this group if I take the weekend, finish it up, and then circulate that version starting next week? Yes, I'm fine. We'll speak with everybody else, but that makes sense.
Yeah, we talked about it today, and there really are, it won't change the intent, or it's not substantive. It'll just be, and it's clearly outlined in the document that you received, what the updates are for. So.
Yes, and thanks, Nick, for all your work on this already.
Cynthia, did you have something to say?
So just a process question so that people who might be watching could understand this. So we have the version that's in the agenda packet, which is now publicly available. It's on the website. We know that Nick is going to do some work. How does a member of the public find the revised version for circulation if they aren't already on an email list? Will this revised version be posted somewhere so people can find it? Where would they look?
City website for sure.
It would
be what we've done in the past is to email it out to our list. There's a Ithaca Green Building website, which we'll also post it on. And if there's another place on the city website to put it, I think Joanne's indicating we could do that also. So
it'd be like go under department and then planning and then Ithaca Green Building. I mean, because our website is not really intuitive. So if we could just say really quickly how somebody would find it so that they would know where to look, because honestly, sometimes with our city website, if I don't know exactly where to look, I just can't
It's
find
hard.
it. And the search engine is not easy.
Well, in case anyone here is listening, ithacagreenbuilding.com.
Oh,
We'll post it up on there, ithacagreenbuilding.com.
Perfect. Perfect.
But I will chime in to say that when we redid the website, we did try to put the search box at a much more prominent location, because that is generally the best way to find something, is to type in the keywords, and generally it seems that what you're looking for tends to be in the top few hits.
okay. Thank you. But ithacagreenbuilding.com. Great. Appreciate it. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to both of you for all your work on this and
Ian.
many conversations. Thanks all.
Great. Thank you.
Great. And then I think the last item is the minutes, right? I think Debbie had the minutes earlier. So is there a motion on the minutes?
I didn't have a chance to read them.
By Donna, seconded by Steve. All in favor of approving the minutes? And that carries unanimously. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Donna, seconded by Steve. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thanks.
So we got out of here. Well, it's 9 o'clock. Not too bad.
No, it's not bad. It's not bad.
It was a busy night.
Yes,
All
it was.
I have a process question, I guess, for Seth and Joanne really quickly, and council. As I mentioned in our meeting earlier this month, that there's a slate of agenda or agreements that will be coming out of the SJC recommended for the city with regards to the City Harbor and Guthrie project. It's about 70 pages. I don't want to wait for people to see it, Friday before a meeting. So how would you recommend that I just circulate it? I did send it to Scott Gibson and Mike, that they're going to try and get it on whatever the appropriate agenda is for it to be on. But I just wanted to ask you, how would you best like me to share it with you?
I mean, you're asking to share it with the committee? Or share it
with all of council, because it's 70 pages and it's not an easy read, and Friday before Wednesday is not enough time.
I mean, could you send it to council and just explain all that, and then?
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to circumvent any process.
No, I think that would be fine. I mean, the other thing is, it shouldn't be too large to send a 70-page document. Is it in a PDF form?
Well, when I made it for SJC, I put it in one packet, but it's because of how we do minutes and agendas, it's all in Word documents and everything. So there's there's about 10 agreements or 10 documents.
Let's talk offline, Cynthia. I think maybe we can either do it. You can send it to us. We can put it in PDF, or we could put it in Dropbox, but we could figure it out.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll talk to you separately offline.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks.
All right.
Have a great evening.
Bye-bye. Been a good day.
Yes.
No kidding.
Yes.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.